He's the real thing when it comes to activism around healthcare in America. He really has been at the forefront of so much. He's executive director of the Committee to Protect Healthcare. He is himself an emergency physician in West Michigan. You know, they talk about rural hospitals being affected by the cutbacks in Medicaid. We've talked about it quite a bit on this show. This is one of those rural hospitals, and Rob Davidson knows these rural hospitals because he's actually worked in one. Dr. Rob Davidson, hello, sir.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm really anxious to talk to you about so many things. I know we'll be limited a bit in time, but I'll get right into it. And I say so many things because I think the state of healthcare in America is just being threatened in so many ways. I'll get to this big ugly bill that affects the hospitals and affects Medicaid support and so many who need desperately to be supported by government assistance in one way or another when it comes to healthcare. But I wanted you were really active prior to RFK's confirmation. And you made points passionately and sensibly about who this guy is. As you've seen HHS and NIH coalesce now around this guy, I wonder if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, it's as bad as we all imagined. I mean, our organization had 22,000 plus doctors sign on to a letter nationally urging the Senate not to push this through, urging Senator Cassidy. Unfortunately, he was given assurances and voted yay, and others followed suit. Now we're hearing because of those assurances. And it's all come to fruition what we talked about and probably then some. This guy fired the entire vaccine advisory panel for the CDC because of conflicts of interest. So he said the same day installed 8 people to replace the 17, and one of those 8 had to resign because they alone had more conflicts of interest than the 17 combined. I mean, that just sort of sums it up. He's continued to mistrust about vaccines. Um, and then just the grift with this guy. I mean, one little nugget, one little quote from an appropriations committee testimony that he gave was about wearables. Okay, so we're sports watches, but glucose monitors. Okay, for people with diabetes, these are critically important, right? When do I give myself insulin? When am I heading for a crisis? But there are some in the wellness space who are pushing these glucose monitors for just everyday folks. Like somehow you should know, what your sugar is. It turns out the woman that he appointed or that he has helped to get appointed as a surgeon general has a company that made 5.1 million in profits selling glucose monitors in 2023 alone. Like you can't make this stuff up. And meanwhile, 17 million people are going to lose healthcare because of this bill. He's had almost nothing to say about that, except just yesterday on Fox Business, he said, "Well, they're not actually cuts, even though they are cuts." He's talking about wearables. If you learn your sugar's high or your sugar's low and you don't have insurance, what the hell are you going to do about it? I don't know. I don't know if he knows, but somebody's going to get rich off of him pushing this stuff.
That's such a good point. I mean, the point that this information is great, but if you have there's no action plan and no way to pay for it, then what's it good for? Um, is this the beginning of? I don't want to overstate it, but I feel as though it's the beginning of a healthcare collapse, or at least that's a defensible position at this point, as you watch all of these different fronts that you described.
Yeah, I don't think it's alarmist to be saying that. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that. But I mean, the beginning of the collapse probably started under Reagan, with privatizing so many systems in healthcare. We now have Medicare. Over 50% of Medicare recipients get privatized Medicare under Medicare Advantage, right? Big insurance companies making billions of dollars off of us as taxpayers paying into Medicare, and then Medicare doling out 20% more per person on average for people in these plans. And then when they need health care, they can't afford it. It's more expensive, right? These plans give them, gym memberships, and yet when they're actually hospitalized or they need a test or medication, they're nowhere to be found.
Is Medicare Advantage really something of a scam, Dr. Rob Davidson?
Yeah, it's a total scam. And we've all been warning that, Republicans want to privatize Medicare. And we kind of have those arguments around that notion. And the reality is Medicare is already privatized more than 50%. It's a big scam because, again, it's a transfer of taxpayer dollars. Every single dollar you earn, in earnings, not not dividends, right? Not pass-through income, not the money that Jeff Bezos is making, the money that you and I are making and regular folks are making. Every single dollar of that is taxed, for a total of about 3% goes into Medicare, and they're doling out those dollars to places like United Healthcare and Cigna and other for-profit entities that are just raking in the profits.
Yeah, I mean, it's so consistent with everything that, as you say, it's been in the works for decades, the privatization of so much. Now it just seems to be supercharged with the control of government complete. And the Congress, I'd say, the GOP completely in the thrall of or in fear of the chief executive. And so they've been able to push it through at a pretty intense pace. And so we get to that big, ugly bill that undercuts Medicaid completely, that saps these places. And you're very familiar with these places. These rural hospitals are talked about because they are on the front lines. I was making the point, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not just that Medicaid patients get their bills paid. It's that the hospitals themselves depend on revenue coming from Medicaid on some level to remain open.
Absolutely. That's how Medicaid works. It's insurance. The tropes we're hearing from folks on the right of someone, a 29-year-old sitting in their parents' basement playing video games collecting Medicaid. Unless this person has a little clinic down there and they're seeing patients, they're not getting anything from Medicaid by playing video games. Now, if that person ends up having appendicitis and they can avoid having a ruptured appendix, and if they're a woman having infertility later in life, or if not, if, getting septic, yeah, Medicaid would pay for that hospital bill. We want it to, right? We want people to have affordable care. At least some of us do. And so that's what taking away Medicaid does. It takes away those revenues from hospitals that disproportionately depend on people on Medicaid, because people in those communities at a higher rate have Medicaid than they do in suburban communities. Even though so many of them have voted for the very people who voted for this legislation and the president who signed it. I mean, the place I work, about 70% supported Donald Trump. And yet, a third of the patients who come in our doors are Medicaid recipients. 40% of the people having babies in the labor and delivery unit. We had our chief of OB came down just about a month ago as this was all being discussed in Congress and said, I don't know how we possibly stay open to the extent that we are currently open and offering services if this thing goes through, because those revenues, those resources, they don't just go away for people on Medicaid, they go away for the whole system. And then everybody in that community, even the 60% not getting Medicaid, having babies in those L&D units, they don't have a place to go either.
I don't mean to drag you into the politics of it, but by the same token, you just referenced the fact that so many of the patients that you see are supporters of this president of the MAGA movement, which is the reason they're going to lose their Medicaid. Can you speak to that and that disconnect, at least as you've sort of observed it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a disconnect. And let's be real. This movement to take healthcare away from folks, this is really not MAGA. This is a Republican fever dream for decades, right? Since before Reagan, probably. Certainly when I had a conversation with Mike Pence in a diner in Iowa about Medicaid.
Yeah, we found that.
Block grants.
Run that. Do you have it, Tony? This is Dr. Rob Davidson. This is Mike Pence when he was vice president. And you basically lay it out to him. We'll just run a couple of seconds of it, but it speaks to how you've been on the beat for a long time and how this has been an issue for a long time. Go ahead, Tony.
Hey, gentlemen.
Hey,
how
you doing?
Dr. Rob Davidson. How you doing? Hey, Rob. Good to meet you.
Hi there. I'm Joel.
Joel. So I'm.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Vice
I'm
President.
an emergency doctor. I'm worried about plans they talked about last week of maybe cutting Medicare, and then the rollout today of cutting Medicaid. I work in one of the poorest counties in Michigan, and my patients depend on expanded Medicaid. So how is that going to affect my patients?
Yeah. I haven't heard about cutting some Medicaid.
Cutting Medicaid, yeah. The head of CMS announced the plan to let states file for waivers so they could get block grants. So that would essentially cut the amount of money going to the states. So it would cut federal Medicaid funding. Is that a good idea?
Actually, when I was governor of Indiana, we got a waiver from the Obama administration that actually allowed us to expand Medicaid coverage in the states.
Right,
Yeah,
but now
but
they're
that's not
talking
the
about
Obama
scaling
administration
back
anymore. So I don't know if people can really hear this very well. A lot of people are just listening, but you really call them out and you talk about.
Yeah.
But as you were saying, that was just again another planned body blow.
Yeah. Yeah. Block grants were a way they could cap funding at a certain amount, and then states would just have to fend for themselves. That was right before COVID. That was the end of January 2020. I didn't predict what could happen, but during COVID, so many people were out of work. So many people needed healthcare. Medicaid went from 70 million to nearly 100 million people on Medicaid temporarily. And with a block grant system of like a fixed dollar amount from the feds, states couldn't do that. People would have been left hung out to dry. And so, yeah, this is something they've been working on. Now, why people, particularly in the communities like where I work, would vote against their interests, I hear that a lot. I have great compassion for these folks. I mean, there are people I've been serving for 20 some odd years, like hardworking people who care about their neighbors in their community, who I honestly think just don't know that this is what they're doing, right? They're very engaged on a lot of social issues and social media where the algorithms just stoke anger and division. And so that anger drives people to vote in a certain way. And then, if you go on Fox News now, all you hear about is how these aren't cuts, right? You hear RFK Jr. talking about it. You hear Dr. Oz telling people, well, if you just don't eat carrot cake and take care of yourselves, you won't need the healthcare. This really won't come to pass. Or others telling them, well, we're going to transfer people from Medicaid to jobs, right? Jobs that we know don't pay enough, often don't give healthcare. Folks at Walmart, folks at Amazon in huge numbers are on Medicaid because they have jobs where they can't get affordable healthcare.
Yeah,
It's
that's
tough.
truly a
People don't know.
misconception. Yeah.
And we need to communicate with those folks for sure. And we do, we are as an organization, and I know a lot of advocates do as well.
Well, that's really the beauty of the work you do is the advocacy, and it's thankless, and I think it's sort of frankly limitless in the demands. That is to say, as you've pointed out, decade after decade, we've seen this happen. It's been this kind of privatization creep that has taken over, and now we're seeing the effects of that in a big way. And I'm wondering, just on that point, if you can speak to sort of an action plan from this point forward.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all eyes are turning to the midterms in 2026, right? I'm happy to get political because these guys make it political when they take these votes against the interests of their constituents who, in November of 26 become their voters. And so I think it's incredibly important that in places across the country, including Michigan's 7th District, Tom Barrett and Lansing, the Republican first term who voted for these cuts. We had a press conference there right before they took this vote. And I spoke, and it ran in local media. And someone on the janitorial staff came up to me in the hospital about 4 days later, said, "Hey, Doc, thanks so much for your speech the other day. It really meant a lot," right? So when you say it's thankless, I would say it's extremely rewarding because people hear it. And when they hear it from people in their community, physicians in particular, that they know, that they trust, and they hear the impacts of these votes, it sinks home. People kind of gain a bit more of an understanding. And if we can continue to now hold these folks accountable that took this terrible vote and took away healthcare from so many people, I think that honestly has to be the game plan from now for the next 16 months.
I think the plan that we've seen enacted that you've referenced, where they basically say, we didn't roll back any Medicaid, we didn't do it. The Democrats were part of that. They if you lost your plan, you've lost it because of the Democrats. I mean, it's just an outright misrepresentation or lie. That is the plan. I've heard Trump already do it. I heard him literally say those words.
Yeah, you're right. And so it's about flooding the zone, right? We have been on a lot of calls with advocates, and we all are kind of saying, to give people hope, we're all saying the same thing, and we all really believe it. The message is fine, right? Any message about people getting healthcare taken away resonates with regular people, regular voters. It's about volume. We have to be out there, and every channel, everywhere we go. I'm doing a ton right now, going to do more personally, but people, all across the spectrum have to be doing this. Because if not, right, the algorithms out there on social media, they're gonna continue to stoke the anger, stoke the division. We have to flood that zone and kind of try to dominate their misinformation, their disinformation.
On a practical level, in our last minute here, tell me what's happening with your hospital and with the healthcare that does depend on that Medicaid revenue. It's the cut is still a ways off, right?
It is, but we already heard a hospital in Curtis, Nebraska, rural hospital said they're closing and they reference these cuts, right? Because hospitals have to plan out their budgets like any business, 5 years into the future or so. These things are coming in the next couple of years. And so that's a big concern. We got a big email from the CEO of our entire health system. We're talking like 20 some hospitals, big, small, urban, rural, saying these cuts, while they're going to primarily affect recipients in these places, they're going to affect the system as a whole. It's going to have wide reaching effects because exactly what I said before. When you take away those revenues, if they're a third or even if they're 20% of the revenues for a hospital, if you make a significant dent in those revenues, hospitals have to respond, right? They're going to have more compensated care. They're going to pass it along to insurers who are going to pass it along to folks with insurance. So yeah, I think to get ready, we're kind of bracing ourselves for cuts we know are going to happen, and then trying to communicate with our patients, that we will be there for them, particularly in the ER. The law mandates it, and we appreciate that law being there. But again, for me as an advocate, the next step is to say something you can do about it next November. When I'm outside of those hospital walls, that's what I'm going to spend my time doing.
Yeah, the messaging is critical, and the messaging was seized effectively by GOP interests and privatization interests, big money. And so one of the great things you have is real world experience. You can speak to this stuff with a kind of authenticity that a lot of others cannot. So I really appreciate your activism. You've got a door open here. I hope we'll revisit some of this stuff in the months ahead and can help spread it, because it's important work, Dr. Rob. So appreciate you spending time with us. Do they call you Dr. Rob or Dr. Davidson there in the hospital?
Dr. Rob is great. Rob is great. Yeah,
Okay.
I've been called a lot worse things at 3 o'clock in the morning by some patients and maybe some staff, but yeah, Dr. Rob's great.
So appreciate you here, Dr. Rob Davidson. Thanks so much. Is there a website that people can keep up on the Committee to Protect Healthcare?
Absolutely. Committee2protect.org. Love people to come on. Physicians, particularly if you're listening, sign up, join what we're doing, be a part of this movement, be a voice in your community to help protect affordable, accessible healthcare for all of our patients.
We'll have a link under this video, so anyone watching can just click on that. Thanks, and we'll talk again soon. Appreciate all the work you do.
Look forward to it. Bye.
All right, Dr. Rob Davidson. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.